The Messerschmitt Me-328 was one of these aircraft that had big plans, but never really got too far into development. Hello everyone, I'm Matt, this is Model Minutes, and join me on the workbench today as I build and review the PM model Me-328 in 1/72 scale. For a deeper dive inside the box of this kit, check out my dedicated unboxing video where I take a look at the plastic parts, instructions and decals. In this video I'll be focusing on what this kit is like to build and rounding off with a review at the end. As usual, I'll put a list of the products I used on the screen here to give you an idea of the kind of things to go and get if you fancy building this kit for yourself. And without any further ado, let's get into it. As normal, I'll cut the parts that I need away from the sprues using my cutters. Any rough areas of plastic or excess flash can be carefully removed using a sanding stick or shaved away with a sharp knife. This is a slightly older tooling, so there is some flash present in a few places. Tamiya extra thin cement will be my glue of choice throughout this build, and the first steps were to assemble the very crude cockpit components. The rudder pedals and seat are already moulded onto the cockpit floor, so at this point all I need to do is install the control column. This assembly can then be glued into one of the fuselage halves into the relevant mounting points. There's no crew figure included, but the cockpit is pretty small, so you won't see much of this through the cockpit canopy. Humbrol number 240, which is a RLM02 grey colour, was hand painted onto all of the internal fuselage parts, including this cockpit area. And then to add a little bit of extra detail, some of this 62 matte leather colour was painted onto the seat for the pilot. 32, which is a dark grey, would be used to pick out the control panel area and the top of the control column. And as for cockpit detailing, that's pretty much it. Now it's time to close the fuselage halves together. The fit of the parts is generally okay, but there is a slight seam which may need a little bit of attention. I did sand this down to try and smooth it out, but this could have had a little more attention paid to it, and in the finished build, this seam is slightly noticeable. Now onto the wings. The wings come as single components, there's no upper or lower parts to join together, so these were then glued into their slots on the side of the aircraft fuselage. The fit is generally okay, and whilst I didn't bother to use any filler at the wing roots, there is a small gap which could benefit from it. The rear tail surfaces were joined in very much the same way, and then I built the included stand. I'm not sure if this was something that was historically accurate or is simply used to display the model. It does seem to hold the aircraft quite well though. Humbrol clear fix will be used to glue in the clear part. You only get one clear part and there's no moulded detail or canopy frames on it, so I had to mask this and effectively mask the areas to try and give an impression of where the canopy framework might be in real life. The clear fix should glue this in nice and strong and not react with the plastic. And now it's time to prime. This isn't exactly a big project. I'm using one of my favourite primers at the moment, Army Painter Matte Black, which comes in a rattle can. This was applied to the display stand and also the aircraft. This should give a nice uniform base layer for the next paints to stick to. And speaking of the next paints, I'm going to go with this Vallejo RLM65 Light Blue. I loaded this into my airbrush with a tiny drop of thinner just to prevent any tip dry. This was then airbrushed onto all of the lower sides. I did attempt a little bit of pre-shading and modulation with this, seeing as there's not much of this kit to look at, and I hope some of this shows through in the finished build. When that was dry, the next paint to be added was this RLM71, which is a dark green, and this was applied to the top surfaces. You can see that I did use the light blue to do a bit of pre-shading on the upper surfaces as well. But for the green, I would just build up the colour and attempt to apply this paint freehand. There's no complicated modelling or anything, but what I'm trying to do is test my skills on creating a nice clean edge between the two colours. So effectively I'm using this kit as a practice for my airbrushing skills. And with that done, it's time to move on to the decals. So the decals come on a small sheet, and as I identified in my unboxing video, there is a little bit of misprinting on mine. The registration of the different colours isn't quite as aligned as it could be, and also the black crosses has some wavy black lines at the edges. They should work though, so I cut the ones that I wanted from the sheets and then dipped them in some warm water. And don't get your brush water mixed up with your cup of tea with one of my brush water mugs. Check out my merch store and you'll be helping to support the channel. With the decals suitably soaked, a little bit more water was applied to the relevant areas, and then they were carefully slid into position and allowed to settle into the surface. Some Mr. Hobby Mr. Mark softer would then be brushed over the top to soften the transfers into the surface details. Not that there are that many surface details, but it should help them appear as though they were painted on. Given that there are only a few decals, this step was relatively quick and painless. I didn't find the decal application stage particularly difficult, and I think all in, this took me about 10 minutes. When those decals had cured, some of this custom service satin varnish would be loaded into the airbrush and then sprayed over the entire model. This is going to help seal in those decals and give a nice smooth surface ready for the next step, which is a little bit of weathering. My favourite wash at the moment is this Humbrol No. 79 blue-grey enamel, which I thinned down with quite a bit of white spirit. This very thin paint was then applied over the entire aircraft, but I did take care to avoid the cockpit canopy area. The white spirit that I've used to thin this down could react with the cockpit canopy and cause it to fog up. That satin varnish that I previously applied should allow all of this wash to run into any of the recessed details. There are some recessed panel lines and things, but they are very subtle. So I'm hoping that this wash will add an element of dirt and grime, a little bit of contrast, and help bring out some of those details. I'd leave that to dry, and then when it was ready, this XW1, which is an ultra matte varnish from K-Colors, would be airbrushed over the entire model. This is just going to dull everything down, get rid of that satin shine, and give it a more matte appearance. After this, the cockpit canopy masking which I applied earlier was carefully removed. It does seem that the areas that were not masked do give the impression of cockpit framework. The final step was to add the aircraft onto its little display stand, and I'm going to call my build of the PM model Messerschmitt Me-328 complete. And that's another build under the belt. So what I'm going to do is talk about some of the negatives of this kit and then swing into the more positive aspects. And on a negative kind of basis, I think the decals are not necessarily the best quality that I've experienced. That little bit of misprinting did kind of come away. It's almost like the printing hadn't gone onto all of the decal film. So actually the decals don't look quite right. If you get up close, you can see the registration is a little bit off, and maybe there isn't all the printing that perhaps should be there, but it is quite minimal. So if you're looking at this from normal distances, the decals don't look too bad. This is an area that I would like PM model to improve on. The decals could be improved ever so slightly, but for the most part they are generally usable. Another thing that was a little bit annoying, and it's more a comment on my own build, was the fact that we do have that slight seam along the top. I did address it slightly, but it could have been addressed much more to smooth out the look of the fuselage. Also at the wing roots, as I mentioned, there's a small gap which I could have added some filler to. I didn't bother. It's not as noticeable perhaps as it could have been, but some filler definitely could have helped with the overall look at that area of the kit. One thing I do want to talk about is in the instructions. At 2 points they actually mix up which is the version 1 and version 2. So this kit comes with two options. It comes with version 1, which I've built here with the long wings, or version 2, which come with short wings. And in the instructions, they actually, like on the box, they have it the correct way around, and then in the actual instructions, they have it flipped. So you just kind of got to keep an eye out for that. I think it is literally just a matter of a typo, but it did throw me a couple of times during the build. One other little negative perhaps is the fact that this doesn't come with a lot of detail. And although the details that are present are generally of the recessed panel line variety, which we like as a modern feature in our kits, it's very subtle. But swinging into the more positive aspects, I actually quite enjoyed this build. This is going to be suitable effectively for a beginner, in my opinion. It only has 17 parts, and actually 5 of those you don't use because 2 of them represent the other type of wings, and there are parts which could be used to display this as part of a Mistel combination. And actually, as I'm talking about that now, Airfix did actually box this as part of a Mistel kit back in the early 2000s. So this is probably what I will do with this. I'll hold on to this and use those supports to create some kind of custom Mistel kit at some point in the future. Some of the other positives about this kit is that because it has such a low part count and it has such a simple paint scheme, this is going to be perfect for a beginner. It's just one colour on the bottom, one colour on the top. It could be easily brush painted. In actual fact, this entire build took me from start to finish only 3 hours. And that's including drying time and me stopping for lunch and going and doing other things. So this is just like an afternoon build. You could expand on this and make it as complicated as you like. Or if you just want something to build of an afternoon, this would be completely perfect for that. It does swing back to sort of the price of this kit. So the recommended retail price is £6.99 here in the UK at the time I'm making this video. I did get mine ever so slightly cheaper, but this is very similar to that DFS 194 that I built last year, in the sense that yes, it's a very simple kit, but I do think it's ever so slightly overpriced for what you're getting. As I mentioned, you only get 17 parts and 5 of those are not used. The mold quality is a little bit questionable, the fit is a little bit questionable in places too, and as a result, I think that maybe £7 for such a simple kit. So in my case, I got 3 hours of enjoyment out of it. Is £7 for the sake of 3 hours that good of value for money? Like I said in my unboxing, I would much prefer to have seen another sprue in this kit, so you could do both version 1 with the long wings and version 2 with the short wings. That, in my opinion, would be so much better value for money, and I really hope PM Models takes this on board and perhaps releases this again with 2 sprues and both options represented. So talking about the age of this kit then, this is actually a 90s tooling. It's not particularly clear specifically when in the 90s, but that it is at some point in the 90s. But the version I have here has been in production since 2017. It's been available, reboxed a few times. As I mentioned, Airfix had it as part of a Mistel combination with a Dornier twin-engined aircraft, which you could mount this on top of. And also there was another boxing where there were aftermarket parts added to include the sort of experimental pulse jets that they wanted to actually use this to power the aircraft. The real aircraft I've got here is effectively at its glider test stage. It did go on to have powered tests, but it didn't really go much further than that in its development. But yeah, I think it's probably time to wrap this one up here. This is a simple and slightly crude kit, but it was quick to construct and it could be suitable for a beginner due to its low part count, its simple construction, its two-tone paint scheme, and the fact that it might push you to do a little bit of extra work to sand and fill some gaps, without being too unmanageable. Yes, it might be a little bit expensive for what we get inside of the box, and I would like to see another sprue to make it better value for money, but on the whole, I actually quite enjoyed doing this one, and I'll be putting it to one side to make some kind of custom Mistel combination aircraft at some point in the future. But with that, I think it's probably time to leave this one here. Let me know down in the comments what you thought of my build and whether my assessment of this kit was fair. Don't forget that we do have a Model Minutes Model Club, and if you'd like to join the Model Club and get early access to videos and other exclusive perks, check out the links in the description. Massive thanks to these guys on screen for the extra support they give the channel, and if you'd like to join them, all the information is below the video. Alternatively, you can help support the channel in other ways, and again, information is in the description. The best way to support the channel for free though is by subscribing with notifications turned on so you never miss a modelling upload. Finally though, last thing to say is a massive thank you to you for watching this one, and I'll see you on the workbench again next time.